So thank you for joining today's panel discussion webinar. My name's Ian Ginn, Director of IFG Consulting, which is growth consultancy, and I'm your host, and it's my pleasure to host this event. We've got three panelists, and we thought it'd be good to mix it up between the different various ways of looking at this topic, the topic being paradox of choice in service automation, selecting the right tool for the right job, because there seems to be so much choice. We have, from an operator perspective, we have BICS on the call, who are an operator in Belgium, represented by Eric Loos. We then have a analyst company, Appledore Research, represented by Francis Haysom, and we then have an actual vendor who sells intent-based orchestration, represented by Stefan Walraven, who is founder and CEO of the company. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome you, audience, for spending time with us today to talk about this quite interesting topic and varied topic for the operators. So let's start off with some questions. But before that, be aware you have the Q&A panel. So we will be talking for about 30 minutes and then taking some Q&A questions. So please use that. And then afterwards, if you have to follow up, we will do after the event. But so the first question, I'd just like the panelists to introduce themselves briefly and really their involvement in orchestration. Maybe I could ask you, Stefan, to do that, please. Could you kindly just say a few words about yourself and involvement in orchestration?
Hello, my name is Stefan Walraven, and I'm a co-founder and CEO of Imanta. And Imanta is an innovative software company specialized in intent-based service orchestration to enable end-to-end automation. And we enable CSPs and service providers to deliver their services much faster and with more flexibility. And I think our involvement with orchestration is clear. We're a vendor of an orchestration tool.
Thank you. That's great. Great. Francis, would you like to just say a few words about yourself and involvement with orchestration?
Yeah, hi, I'm Francis Haysom. I'm principal analyst at Appledore Research. We're a small boutique analyst firm, which has been focused from the beginning on the whole aspects of network automation and software in networks. My background is not as an analyst. I actually come from the OSS BSS space as a vendor, both in startups and large companies like Amdocs and Ericsson. From point of view of the subject today, one of the key areas we're working on at the moment is a whole degree of market research on the whole service orchestration area, and we're hoping to release that in this quarter, probably just after Mobile World Congress.
That sounds an interesting topic indeed, and I'm sure there's lots of work behind that. And Eric, would you kind enough say a few words about yourself and your involvement with this topic of orchestration? I mean, you're the person who's, as we say in English, at the coalface, having to live this and not just, let's say, talk about it.
Yes, so I'm Eric Loos. I work for BICS, which is a global carrier based in Belgium. We're one of the top 3 to 5, depending on who's counting, roaming and voice carriers in the world. In my previous roles, I was in head of digital transformation. So I've looked at it from a transformational perspective, but now I'm in charge of our data centers. Well, let's say the network and computing stack that's in there, so not the facilities. Obviously, my team needs automation, and one of the vendors that we are working with is Inmanta.
Okay, well, thank you for also declaring that point of interest. I'll stick with you, Eric, and I've got sort of the follow-on question, which sort of hopefully sort of frames this a little bit. So there are so many options with automation tools. You know, automation is just sort of like almost like a buzzword. I mean, what are the sort of problems and challenges that this type of orchestration tools, what are we trying to achieve? And do you actually think it's a good thing to have so much choice?
I'm not familiar. No, I do not know whether you're familiar with the paradox of choice, but if you have a lot of choice, it means if you made a wrong choice, it's your fault. So there, the burden is very much on the operator to make the right choice. The more options there are, it also means that the trade-offs are becoming more complex because they depend a lot on the use cases, the platforms that you're using. With platforms, I mean vendors that you're using, which tooling you have in your existing ecosystem, and also from pointing the noses in the same direction within the teams, it's harder because everybody weighs the different trade-offs differently, and they might want to choose one tool over the other. It's also a given that in order for automation to work in the best possible way, you ideally have vendor support, because you don't want, as a telco, to be investing too much in the interfaces between the orchestrator and the platforms or equipment that you have. You ideally are able to tap in to the initiatives that they have to make their infrastructure more capable of automation. So you need to figure out what a common thread is amongst the platforms you use in terms of what their current focus is for automation. And that makes it a relatively complex trade-off.
So are you also suggesting, therefore, you mentioned on the paradox side, that there are basically, you said the right tool, but is it a case of the right tool for the right job? So there could be potentially different tools used at different parts. You also mentioned multiple domain, or in referring to multiple domains, different parts of different interests. Is there such a thing as one tool, or do you really think there's going to be a set of decisions and tools?
Well, I don't think there is only one tool. There are use cases, and if I would need to make the distinction, I think there is a big divider between mutable and immutable infrastructure. Immutable infrastructure being something you provision from a GitOps model or a DevOps model, and you are able to re-instantiate it completely. So you can destroy it and re-instantiate it without a problem. So if your setup didn't work, it's not a problem. You tear it down, you try again. If you have shared infrastructure, which is typically the case in the backends and the data centers of operators, you have a lot more mutable infrastructure there. The router is serving multiple services, multiple customers. The switching is serving multiple applications. There, it's the risk of doing a destroy and reinitiate is much higher. You need to have a tool that's much more in control, and that's doing a more gradual step-by-step rollout of new configurations and verifying each step of the way whether it's working well, and is able to do a rollback if it's not going well. So there I see these two big, let's say, areas of orchestration applicability.
Yeah, so it's two separate paths, if you like, or let's say from a decision tree perspective.
Yes, yes, because on the immutable infrastructure, the automation can be much simpler, and a lot more people can be involved, because if they do it wrong, it's not such a big issue.
Understand. Thank you very much for that insight. And maybe to Francis, what can you sort of add to that and comment on what Eric was saying?
Yeah, I think the whole area, actually, the diversity is a reflection to some extent of a degree of change and also uncertainty as to what exactly telcos are wanting from the whole orchestration and automation area. So I think in terms of having a lot of automation tools, that's a good thing in a sense, because certainly in our research, what we're finding is this whole area of orchestration is multi-layer, has multi-meanings overlaid on it, and largely driven by the context of it. You've classically had automation in telcos largely focused at sort of mass market consumer broadband offerings, for example, where you have to have automation, but it can be very much a workflow, an imperative workflow that deals with that one. And at the same time, and certainly in an enterprise area, you've often really glued together personalized services by using people But the change is happening, which is a lot of people want to be able to offer things in the same way that the hyperscalers or the cloud providers deliver things. So you're going to need orchestrators, as Eric said, you're going to need ones that are capable of very detailed management and automation of low-level technical aspects, but you're also going to need automation at a very different level, which is the ability to provide that high degree of variability. The mass market broadband is not the opportunity for high revenue. It's the ability to personalize to many the variability of aspects from different industries, both internally to telco and externally to telco that drive that. So you're going to need a lot of tools, but actually the most important thing before you select the tools, what do you want to be? What do you want to change about the way you deliver things? What is your ambition there?
That's very, very, very interesting. As you say, the colourful landscape of the industry reflects the reality of the operator landscape, if you like, and the choices and the differentiation, which services are being delivered. I like that. And Stefan, what would you like to say about this topic of is it a good thing to have lots of choice? But I guess there's only one Inmanta, right?
Yeah, good, but. I think this diversity, it's important, and also there are indeed different purposes, and there you need different tools for that. But I think the complexity of picking the right tool is also that you already mentioned automation, orchestration, the buzzword, but also the other things like characteristics like intent-based and things like that are also buzzwords, and everyone has another definition for that, and every vendor is using it, or almost every vendor, and that makes it for operators more difficult to pick the right tool for the right job, because it looks like every orchestrator can do anything, while it's actually most of them are focusing on specific domains, but it's sometimes really unclear to find out. So I think that's part of the complexity to make the right choice.
But I mean, Imanta does do intent-based, right?
Yes.
So what does that mean from a Imanta perspective, and how does that differentiate itself from some of the other options?
So how we define intent-based is intent is in the end you want to describe what the end result should be, and you don't want to tell the orchestrator what he has to do in which order and all the stuff, because then in the end you are specifying how the orchestrator should do the job, while in the end you want to specify what the end result should be. And the orchestrator should dynamically find out and derive the actions that should be taken to get there. And that would result in a more reliable, robust situation, because it can act on changes in the network, or when there are multiple requests at the same time, or when something goes wrong, it can also easily roll back to a previous state. While it doesn't have to undo all the actions, it knows, okay, I have to return to this specific state, and it will find out how to get there. It's like a navigation system where you say, I want to go to this location from wherever I am at this moment, and you expect the navigation system to tell you how to get there, and if you do something wrong, it will adapt. You don't expect a navigation system that you tell them, oh, you first have to do this step and then this step, and I actually have to start always from this location because otherwise I don't know how to get there. That's not what you expect from this type. And it's the same thing with an orchestrator.
I think they call that declarative sort of programming behind that. I think that's what it's.
You describe in declarative way what the end result should be, instead of saying like these steps you have to do, because
which is a different type of software. Basically, it's the way it's written is quite different, and its way of using it. So coming to you, Francis, thank you for that, Stefan. And coming to you, Francis, so what are the sort of, if we can try and classify or categorize these orchestrators, what are the different sort of orchestrators that we see? And I guess different areas. So you have, I believe, service orchestrators versus domain versus resource orchestrators across NFV, cloud, network. So is there a way of, even though we're saying it's very broad topic, do we have a way of sort of trying to distinguish it?
And I think there is very much a classification. We've recently published in the whole area of automation, where we've kind of called out three key areas within the network domain, which is what we're terming service orchestration, which is effectively the end-to-end orchestration of putting things together. There's domain management in terms of detailed management of a specific domain, and to some extent overlapping with that, what we think is the whole distributed infrastructure orchestration, the management of the underlying compute resource, which typically is managed by a different set of tools. So I think it's useful to see it as separate. So the big players are playing in that type of area. And just a little bit of separation in that one. When we're in domain management, we're seeing two different trends. There's very much the classical domain. This is a domain of technological innovation, but also you're seeing where there's complex interaction between a domain, classic one being IP and optical in the transport domain of a network. Right. You're seeing what I would term is super domain managers, IP optical coexistent management with an orchestration facility specifically targeted at that area. Right. I think within the end-to-end management, you've got, to some extent, you've got the newer sort of agile delivery of an end-to-end service, tied quite tightly with the ambition to do network slicing in the future. But you've also got an overlap, and you've got people coming in from the area of what would have classically been the BSS service order management area. Now, service order management tends to be a very kind of disconnected from technology. It's about bundling things together, but you are seeing the ambition coming down from that classic order management into that area, and the application of those tools from the BSS layer in that area. So those would be my categorizations of the technology. I think it's worth just bringing out a little bit about the concept of orchestration. Declarative is very, very important. Intent-based interfaces are important. But the concept of orchestration is actually pretty, I actually believe it's pretty common in terms of what you're actually trying to do. You're trying to implement some kind of policy. You're trying to make decisions about healing and scaling of whatever it is you're managing. What really distinguishes those kind of areas is the detail of the data, the detail of the knowledge of the domain or the cross the service aspect. So a lot of the aspects of your choice of things in this area is going to be less about the generic concept of automation, but it's the application of knowledge, data on that automation, which is going to be a key thing. So if you want to buy, if you're looking for domain expertise in IP and optical, you're quite highly likely to go to an IP and optical expert vendor to leverage their knowledge of policy in that area, which is a very different one to how do I deliver an end-to-end service, or how do I innovate new end-to-end services in the service orchestrator. So I think that there is a degree, your choice is going to be about expertise. It's not just the tool, it's how to use, it's always still how to use the tool at the end.
That's very, very interesting. And I've got multiple pictures in my head. I'm not sure I can draw any of them regarding, a Venn diagram where they're overlapping or on top of each other, a triangle, because you might have a master orchestrator. I mean, there are different ways of looking at it. But I guess
it's like the most, if you can imagine a cross between lasagna, a Battenberg cake, a layer cake, it's all in the mix, and parts of it aren't even cooked.
So I think that's a good pass over to Eric then. Eric, what sort of cooking are you doing?
Spaghetti, I think, is more sometimes the dish of choice, but it's true, and I think depending on how you look at it, it all boils down to the same thing. If you want to run a reliable infrastructure, you need to have a source of truth of the data of which state you want that network to be in, and you want to be able to have the tools to make sure that if you try to make a change, that it's likely to end up in the desired state. If you look back at how that historically was done, you look at 4ICE principles, RFCs, requests for changes, change management boards, and all of these actions which allow you to take something that's documented in an inventory system through a manual process being deployed on systems. And there you're trying to avoid all the risks that this brings with it. And also just the fact of scaling, because if you try to adapt a lot of devices at the same time, if you try to do that manually, it's not possible. And there, where I agree is that if you look at big inventory systems, they can't possibly hold all kind of details about a service that they're trying to describe, and especially optical. I used to be responsible for an optical network. It's everybody thinks about 10Gs as a very digital thing, but it's extremely analog. All these waves, so it's not something that you could possibly document, or that it's a level of detail that you would never put in a single source of truth. It would be way too hard, and that's where I say you need to have this vendor support for this area, and you need to have APIs which are fully supported. So often that means you need to be closer to the equipment, because most of these domain managers, they especially in optical, they come from element managers that used to be there in the past, and they've put APIs on top of that.
Okay.
But okay, so just to circle back on that, so we try to uncook the spaghetti and make it straight in a way, by ensuring that you use the right level of orchestration to push the required configuration data to an automation component that knows how to translate that limited amount of configuration information it gets into something that actually can configure the ultimate endpoint. So this is where you need multiple tools, because it's impossible to model today's equipment. If you think about a blade server or something that's relatively simple in conceptually, but if you then look at the fiber channel interconnects that go into it, the backplane switching and all of these things, it becomes so complex that you cannot expect there is a single entity that knows how to configure these things in detail. You need abstraction.
Thank you. That's really low detail. That's good to have. Stefan, one of the questions which, as I was talking about pyramid in my mind, I mean, the question which comes up is can you because I believe the Imanta is an end-to-end service orchestrator. So there's a top-down and there's a bottom-up approach. It seems to be what I'm hearing. So what does Imanta sort of? Where do you sit, and can you work with both, or how does that work in practice?
So what we actually recommend is to start with the top-down approach, where you start from the service. What is the end-to-end service that you want to deliver? Because in the end, that's where you bring the value to the business, and then of course it doesn't mean you have to start immediately with all possible features of this service. You can minimize this and have a kind of a minimal viable service then, and then that's where we start typically, and then start refining, creating these abstraction layers till you get to an API or another domain manager that can provide kind of functionality or feature that you need, so that you can delegate. So we start from the service, and then in case, like Eric said, there are domain managers that have some specific knowledge, that they are very specific for the domain, and they are specialized in that. They can provide features that a more generic orchestrator cannot do, or you have to implement a lot of things custom. And that's where you have to find the layer of abstraction that is the right one, where you can start delegating to these different domains.
That's good.
Yeah, and I think the bottom-up approach, it's the approach that is typically used. Most people know the low-level details, and they start automating that part, but then they often lose track of what is the service we want to build, and it's hard when you don't know what is the end-to-end service. I think it's like if you want to if a telecom provider wants to create a new service, bring it to the market, You also start from the requirement, what is needed and what are potential features, and then you start detailing these things. Like an architect also will do, and he will not start with, oh, I have these things, maybe I can create something in the future, but I don't know what yet. So that's a bit the balance finding there. There will be probably some building blocks, but you have to see how does it match with a specific service where you can bring value, and then
flexibility is key, isn't it, to be able to sort of plug in at the right level. That sounds good. Coming back to thanks for that, Stefan. Coming back to you, Francis. So the question is, is there a way of deciding which tool needs to be selected? What's the compelling reason selecting this tool from a business and a technical perspective? Can you shine any light on that topic?
I would come back to my comment about expertise. If you want, to Stefan's point, if you're wanting to build new services, you want to build them from building blocks. You don't want to have to go, you don't want to have to reinvent IP or optical transport routing, for example. So you're going to want, where possible, to leverage capability like that one. Eric raised a key point, and it's generally being increasingly described as this concept of observability, which is the ability to see the data. In using those capabilities, you should be looking for avoidance of what I would term as the element management trap, which is that you can only see the KPIs that the element manager wants to give in the time that they want to give. You can't. You want to have access to the data. Sure, you want it to be abstracted, you want to consume it in an abstracted way, but you don't want to have that hiding of data. Why is that really important? Because there are some things, particularly when you put things across multi-domain, where there are dependencies between them, and you can really only make decisions based on often some very detailed information from each of the domains, even at the end-to-end service one. So it's just an example with another partner we're working at the moment. They literally sort of saying is the difference between restarting a VNF, restarting the container on it, and restarting the Kubernetes cluster that is running that container have penalties in terms of how long you lose a service, etc. You can only make the decision as to which one of them you're going to do by combining detailed information from potentially the domain orchestrator for Kubernetes, the domain for the container, and the domain management for the VNF. So I would say is choose your domain expertise well, the policies, leverage them as best as you can, but make sure that they're open and that they're providing the data that allows you to make intelligent decisions at the higher level.
That sounds very, very good advice indeed. Eric, what would you like to? Would you like to add to that at all?
Well, I think it really depends on what the use cases you are looking at. The tool, the use cases, and what you're trying to achieve will drive what tooling that you need. And there is a timing perspective. There is what is the environment you are working in? Are you working in cloud? Are you working on premise? What's the evolution you're going for? I think an important one, because we are not a very big BICS has 700 employees. We're not a national telco, so we don't have very high volume, low margin products. We have low volume, low margin products, as it is in a wholesale carrier. And there is a lot of customization, and they're building things end to end. The volumes are often not there, so you really need to look at your specific use case and see what makes sense. And that's, I think, if you start with what can the tool do for me before you have analyzed what it is that you need done, it's going to be a problem. I would also say that you need to look at the skills that you can have. If we think about something that's out of the scope of this panel, but Salesforce, it's being used everywhere. It's the standard, but it's so hard to find Salesforce developers. It's a struggle for every single company. So it's not because a tool is popular that is necessarily the best choice, because you might have a hard time finding people that are actually good at it or are at the level that you need for your company, and they might leave quickly because they get a better offer. So it's also about the skills you have in your organization to support such a tool, and whether you want this tooling to live in a separate team, or you would like to have it more as a DevOps kind of approach, where every owner of a platform or of a component provides the automation of their part of the building block. So then you need a broader skill base, but you have to reduce the complexity, and you have to make sure that there are plenty of resources available for them to learn from. Then, so that means you would go for more common tools, so that it's easy to find resources like Stack Overflow or others, where they can start to get going. So based on all of these different angles, you can start building a decision. And I think the most important one is to build options for the future. A business case is often based on the returns now, but there is the future opportunity that you also should look at. And for every track that you choose, you should always see how the first step you've taken helps you along the way, and which other opportunities it unlocks for you.
You bring me to an interesting area, which is you're talking about resources and availability of resources. But would it be a right comment to say that not all tools are equal regarding how much resources are required, and from a maintenance perspective? Because if you're going down the road of developing a particular sort of use case, and we differentiate between workflow and intent, the actual amount of maintenance to keep the service up running might look quite different. It's a question rather than a statement, but that's what I'm wondering. Do you see, once you've got, does workflow need a lot more maintenance than intent type of approach, or you don't see that, or what's the reality regarding the skills and effort in a particular release management, right? Because at the end of the day, underneath we have CI/CD, we have different development chains happening. Therefore, the system is in movement, whatever you like. So how you're going to have to test it, you're going to have to release it. But do these have different implications?
Well, where we are now, I think we have such a highly customized environment for every application that there are two goals to automation. On one hand, there is to do stuff indeed end-to-end through the orchestration, but there is a big secondary field, which is to just make the day-to-day management a lot easier. And their automation can take many forms, and they are not end-to-end workflows. They are making certain steps easier. They are making certain steps more reliable. And it's important for if you think about the skill sets you have in a team, many engineers will still define themselves today as CCIE or an expert in network technology, and to a certain degree pride themselves in being able to do it through a CLI. Whereas actually where you would like to go to is that they no longer touch the equipment, but are ready to write the configuration script that can repeat, does a data transformation from the original state, process it through a kind of a script, and then say, okay, this is the outcome, and now I push it to the network. And these are not big areas, but each automation reduces the amount of error you can have, increases the amount of work you can do in a single change. So I would not say it's really workflow against intent. Intent is the best if you have a complex end-to-end environment, but there are many, not end-to-end workflows, but multi-step processes which can be made much easier without the intent-based approach.
Interesting. Stefan, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, maybe a thing that Eric also mentioned is about thinking also about the future and not only about one specific use case. I think it's always good to think how can if you pick a specific tool, that you can also reuse things in multiple use cases, that you don't have to select a separate tool for every use case, because then it will become quite expensive. So it's also how can we use things that you already built. And I think the testing is also an important part that you also mentioned with the CI/CD. If you automate things, that you can also do the automated testing. I think that's also an important one if you select a tool, that if you make changes, because the things will change, and you want more and more innovation, introducing new service, but also creating new features for a specific existing service. you can easily and automatically test these things and push it much faster to the market.
Right, thank you for that. I'm just conscious of the time, so I'll sort of move on a little bit. Maybe Eric, if you could maybe keep it sort of relatively brief on the question, and I won't put this out a bit beyond yourself, which is to do with the boundaries of an orchestrator. Have you know, what is the boundary of an orchestrator? Because I mean, we're sort of just throwing it out there, an orchestrator, but does it have a natural boundary or delineation between it and other things?
For me, the easiest delineation, which I mentioned in the beginning, is between mutable and immutable.
Okay.
Because you can be much simpler and much more adventurous in the immutable area. So as long as they operate from the same source of truth and that they all update the reference data, you can use the tools where you can. And there is, of course, the level. And there are, even if you have an end-to-end orchestration, part of that end-to-end environment might be mutable and other parts might be immutable. So you might delegate some of the easier work to a simpler orchestrator or a sub-orchestrator, let's say.
Thank you for that. That was quicker than I was hoping. That's great.
You asked to be short, so
yeah, that's very good. So Francis, that gives you a little time to add a little bit to that, if you don't mind.
I'd actually position the sort of northbound of the service orchestrator. I think the service orchestrator will increasingly go further into what has classically been BSS. I think the opportunity there, the ability to encapsulate new services and to expose those services to customers will become increasingly important, and to be able to position those services in a way that others can build those services into that they themselves can orchestrate. So a slightly different piece of research we've been doing is this whole idea of telco platforms, and where you may well see a whole layering, not just of orchestrators, but actually platform providers actually providing end-to-end services. And the more that can be done, and an orchestrator is an end-to-end orchestrator is the means of allowing that, it's the more a telco or its suppliers can participate in as many use cases as they possibly can. So I see the opportunity for orchestration to push well, to effectively take over some of the aspects of some aspects of the BSS.
Right, fantastic. Thank you for that. I'll move on to the next question again, time permitting. Stefan, this one is to you. So suppose I start with a new automation project and don't have an orchestrator automation tool. Where should they start? What's your view on that?
So yeah, I think I mentioned it before. It's important to have an idea. What is the service? What is the use case you want to deliver? And typically, this is, I think, if it's really a service that's bringing value to the company to customers, then it's crossing multiple domains. So it's important that you have a good architecture, good view of this end-to-end service, have the requirements, have all stakeholders involved, because there is more than just a network engineer or something like that. It's often you need people that you don't think of in the beginning. Also the team from the product side that can specify what are typical requirements, and then it's like we start from the service and start refining and find what are the building blocks we can use, we have to integrate with. If you, based on that, have to select an orchestrator, I think based on that, I think you need a service orchestrator anyway. If you have to automate a service, if you purely focus on resource or infrastructure, it's another type of work. So that's based on the use case. But if you start from a service, then I think this end-to-end service orchestrator is anyway something you need. And then if you have some building blocks, you can integrate with that. Or if they are not there, you have to see if you can manage it with this generic orchestrator or not. Maybe you need an additional one where you need the expertise, like Francis already mentioned. If you really need some specific expertise, then you need probably also a more domain-specific orchestrator. Maybe not. It all depends on the situation. And I think first start from the service, the architecture, and find out what are the real requirements to get to the end result.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I will, the other Eric and Francis, maybe starting with Eric. So what is the one piece of advice that you give the audience selecting the right orchestrator, which is not being covered so far in the discussion? I'll be asking the same question to you then, Francis, afterwards.
Which has not been covered. That's the tricky part of that question.
Well, what has not been said so far? Let's put it another way, which you'd like the audience to consider. Maybe that's a.
I think I would just reiterate a point, which is that you really need to look at your use case and the people that you're doing it with, and you also, and that's maybe not being highlighted enough. What's your support platform within the organization to build automation cases? Because ultimately, this is not automation is not a top-down decision per se. You cannot, the management can say we would like to have automation, but unless it's carried by the people that need to identify the opportunities, are willing to spend the time and go through the complexities of the data modeling and everything, it's not going to happen. So the support base you have in the organization is an important part of it. And there I would say that the incremental approach, which is to say we start a bit the bottom up, where Stefan said it's maybe not a good idea, but that approach helps more in building the readiness inside the organization for automation, and then orchestrating it end to end becomes a logical next step. I think that I would say is perhaps not highlighted yet.
Very good comment indeed. And Francis, what would you?
I think mine actually nicely overlap with Eric's, because I think the most important thing is just be really clear what is the change in your business you want orchestration to enable. And there's two parts to that. One is, I think there's a need for a long-term vision, but there also needs to be a view of a lot of short-term opportunities and goals, because a lot of big transformation projects fail because they take too long to actually engender any change. So there needs to be that opportunity, not just for this is where I want to be in 3 years' time, but this is what I want to achieve in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, in terms of both the way I run my business. The other one Eric really brings is culture. Is your willingness to change the culture. I'll be honest about it. You can buy the best service orchestrator on the planet and put it into an existing operational culture that won't change. Nothing will change. Mm-hmm. It will still be run like an EMS with CLI configuration. Mm-hmm. You have to want automation. You have to be willing to take people on a journey to accept that automation, or in fact embrace that automation.
That's a good comment. I was intrigued by Eric's comment about things being customized. You know, people buy COTS products, right, and then they customize them. It's sort of one of the things that happens quite a lot. But it's very true around the organizational part. It's an organizational change of thinking required as much as anything else.
On that, I'll just come back on that one. I think that is a really important point, is that there's a lot of, all telcos have always customized to a large degree. The customization is important, but it needs to be customization in the pursuit of differentiation for the business. It should, and telcos tend to customize often where they don't have differentiation. So where you don't have differentiation, use standard product. Where you think you have differentiation, put in customization, put in investment to work in that area.
Right, makes sense.
Being clear what you want.
Right. Well, at this point, I'd like to just thank you for that. I will move to the Q&A if that's okay. We have some good some questions coming in, so I think we'll take a look at them and maybe spend 5-10 minutes. So apologize that this has overrun a little bit, but I think the discussion's been worthwhile. I'd like to take the question of which is about what types of service assurance capability should there be in a service orchestration supporting during evaluation? Does that make sense? What type of service assurance capability should have a service orchestration support during evaluation? Is someone able to follow that one? Does that? Makes sense. Okay.
I'll take a quick view. I mentioned earlier this concept is very much coming from IT, which is the idea of observability and very much the ability to draw upon real-time streaming data and in detail as well as KPIs. I think the service assurance capabilities that really need to be brought into that are twofold. One of which is availability of that data to enable new policies, and the availability of data to determine new, probably AI-driven or analytics-driven new opportunities to see, I have this happen and this happen, I need to take some form of orchestration policy decision. The second thing is from the service assurance capability, there is a lot of knowledge already bound up in what I would term is the silo of service assurance applications. How do you bring that out to expose what is value and is policy that could be used more widely within service orchestration, domain orchestration, or multi-vendor orchestration?
Okay, thank you for that response. Anyone to comment on that, or is okay, Stefan?
Yeah, I think the assurance part is really important in the service or in the orchestration automation story. But it's therefore I think also important that the orchestrator can integrate well with those different tools and configure definitely an intent-based approach where you can configure this policy or is intent also toward this assurance system so that you can create this closed loop in the end where you can use this information from the data to act on that when necessary. So I think it's an important aspect of the whole story, but it's like a friend has also said, I think majority of these systems are still focusing on lower level data, and you have to map that to a service level. What is the impact on the service of all these different tools in different domains, and how can you combine it to make a decision at the service level then and act on that?
Okay, thank you for that. I'm thinking of the time. I'd like to take one last question. So what do panelists see as the opportunity in orchestration in doing business? So what's the real business? I guess that's the question of what's the real business value. I think that's a good final sort of question to ask you to look at. Eric, have you got a view on that? Why are we doing it?
Why are we doing it? We are doing it in parts. If you're doing it to save costs, you're probably doing it wrong. You need to identify new opportunities where that can only be served by automation. And there are use cases there which typically relate to products which are only successful if the customer has the ability to do self-service. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. And when you can quantify the risk that you're eliminating, those are the big business values. Unique opportunities using automation or significantly reduced risk, I would say.
Okay, so maybe building on that, Francis, what are these sort of, through orchestration, what business enablement am I achieving which I was not able to do before? What are can you characterize them a bit?
I think that the key one is the ability to participate in as many use cases as you are. We're very happy with the kind of automation for mass market consumer products, but if you certainly in enterprise and increasingly also within consumer, you're no longer selling a service to the same service to millions of people. You're maybe selling variants, a wider variant of services to that million people. You're doing it increasingly on demand or in relationship to an immediate consumer need rather than upfront as part of an initial order. So it's your ability to deal largely with that variability without effectively creating an operational headache. Basically, no amount of operational scaling, unless you provide that variability, will have a huge impact on your network operations center, your service operations center, etc. So it's going to be about how do I manage huge potential variability, multiple customers, new use cases, all at the same time as managing and contain and sort of having both excellent operations, excellent experience, and high degrees of automation, because you simply can't scale without it.
I guess the word that sticks in my mind, having you said that, agility in delivering services in an efficient, effective way, in a scalable way, differentiation and scalability. Stefan, have you got what do we see as the opportunity, the business opportunity? Why are operators doing this?
I think,
and what are we enabling through that?
With Francis, it's also, I think, also the customer, the enterprise customer, mainly, that they are expecting also more and more things on demand. They want it now, not tomorrow or in 3 weeks or whatever. They need it now, and maybe they only need it for a week. But also this customization, variations are still necessary, and it's how can you do this in a way that you can still maintain this all these options. It's like a car manufacturer where the product line where always the same car comes from, but they all have different options, different features, and customers can select from it. But there are still a lot of automation in these product lines too. The same way, actually, we want to use this automation to do this for in telco, where you can deliver the same service but with a lot of variations without all the cost and all the difficulty to maintain this in the long term. So that's, I think, the value of automation that could bring these opportunities.
Okay, thank you very much, Stefan. And I'd like to thank the panel for discussion, and I'd also thank you, the audience, for their participation and their questions. I do apologize that we've overrun, and I also apologize we haven't been able to field all the questions. We will, though, I think we can agree on that, answer those questions individually afterwards. I think there's always the opportunity they'll be captured. So for those people whose questions were not answered, we'll try and get a written response around that. The other thing is this will be on demand for a period of time. So if you have colleagues that you think might be interested in this thought-provoking discussion, please, they can certainly sign up for the next 2 or 3 weeks. It will be available. And I think all the panelists are open for discussions and interested in this topic more generally. So I think with that, I'd like to again thank everyone, the audience and the panelists, for your time and interesting discussion, and wish you a good day. Thank you very much, everyone.